Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Rural Vision Week, imagining the future of Europe's rural areas. I'm David Lamb. I'm from the ENRD Contact Point, and I'm going to be your Master of Ceremonies for today. This is the start of a week of activities where we'll have lots of interaction. You've seen at the start or introduction, plenty of opportunity to get involved, and it is so important that you do get involved. Today is the high-level opening plenary. English is our working language for the event, and interpretation will be provided into English, French, German, Italian, Polish, Spanish, and Portuguese. You can get involved through the chat, but you can also get involved through Twitter using two hashtags, hashtag Rural2040 or hashtag RuralVisionEU. So we want to see you get involved. Like I said, and maybe slightly misspoke, we're imagining the future of Europe's rural areas. That's us all collectively. So we want to get you involved. Today, high-level opening plenary session, we have a lot of support, and the strength and the support of the European Commission and the other international bodies behind this initiative is shown by a really packed agenda. First of all, we'll have Dubravka Suica, the European Commission Vice President for Democracy and Demography, followed by Maria de Seus Atunes, who's the Minister of Agriculture for Portugal. Then Janusz Wojciechowski, of course, our European Commissioner for Agriculture. And then a discussion between Doug O'Brien, who is President of the National Cooperative Business Association in the USA, and he'll be joined in an exchange by Michal Dumitru, who is Deputy Director General DG Agri. So, without further ado, and let's get us started, I'd like to make the opening speech the Vice President for Democracy and Demography of the European Commission, Dubravka Suica. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me. So, as you know, together with my colleague, Commissioner Wojciechowski, and the Portuguese presidency, it's my pleasure to open this Rural Vision Week. We will spend this time together with key stakeholders, discussing and exchanging ideas on the better future we are building for our rural areas. This better future begins today, and the long-term vision for rural areas, which we will adopt in June, is a vision for the future indeed, but it starts now with actions to be implemented as of its adoption. This week offers us an opportunity to present the results of the public consultation on the long-term vision that we conducted at the end of last year, as well as the highlights of our foresight exercise on the same topic. But more importantly, it will enrich the vision through discussion with stakeholders through a number of interactive workshops and plenary sessions. We want to make sure that this vision is our joint vision, the one developed not for rural areas, but rather with rural areas. A vision celebrating partnership and making sure that nobody is left behind in the different transitions and processes. This is the very reason why the coordinated and elaboration of this initiative, so coordination and elaboration of this initiative has been placed under my portfolio and the Commission's work strength on democracy and demography. Our ambition is to create a new momentum for rural areas by bringing to these rural areas new opportunities, while at the same time giving our rural citizens a strong voice and making them an integral part of the future of Europe. I must mention here the conference on the future of Europe, because we cannot speak about any vision for the future without making a reference to it. The conference is a highly visible European Union-wide exercise in citizen engagement and empowerment. It will bring citizens into the heart of policymaking in the European Union. We will work with citizens on issues of concern to them, so together we can make our common future brighter and more prosperous. And I very much count on our rural areas to give their particular touch to this process and to contribute actively. This is also the reason why I have started my intervention with references to our public consultation. Because just like the conference, we cannot develop vision or initiatives without the people most concerned. We cannot speak about rural areas without listening to our rural citizens and understanding their everyday challenges. This is why we did not limit ourselves just to last year's public consultation to underpin our reflection. We also co-organize workshops in most member states involving more than 2,700 rural actors. I personally met a large number of stakeholders and different local authorities, and we organized this Rural Week. I'm here today together with my colleague Commissioner Wojciechowski, who will highlight the importance of agriculture and farming when speaking about the vision we are jointly developing. And rightly so, because life in many rural areas remains intrinsically linked to agriculture. But what I would wish to highlight today is that this vision that we are developing will go way beyond agriculture, beyond demography, actually beyond any of our individual policies. Its added value will be in its comprehensive nature, in the recognition that to be relevant, this vision needs to rule-proof all our policies by looking at them through rural lens and make sure that all our initiatives and proposals respond to the needs and expectations of our rural citizens. Many rural areas are today facing situations like population decline and aging. They are dealing with the erosion of infrastructure and services such as health and education, dwindling employment and incomes. Also, limited transport and digital connectivity have become recurring issues in many rural areas, and this at a time when so much of our lives has moved online. We are confident that with this vision, we will create a new momentum for rural areas, that with the help of our stakeholders, we will make sure our rural regions are even more dynamic and attractive to new generations, attractive to young entrepreneurs, to new businesses, to innovators. The tragedy of COVID 19 has taught us all some lessons. And one of the key lessons is that it's not important where you are as long as you are connected. To make your voice heard today, to have a good job, even to study, you no longer have to be close to a city center. You can actually enjoy a healthier, more secure, and better quality of life in a more remote or rural area as long as you can be connected. It is true that digital connectivity profoundly changes our relationships with work and with other people and gives new life to rural and more remote areas. However, we must remember the physical connection. We need to make sure that this vision goes hand in hand with transport and smart mobility solutions, which are key not only for our social well being, but also for businesses, industry, or production. And I will finish on this point. Over the next 20 years, the attractiveness of rural areas will largely depend on improved services, digital connectivity, and greener farming. We will capitalize on the advantages of rural areas and try to turn the challenges into new opportunities. We will do all this with the help of synergies between our funds, with very concrete actions, and with tangible tools that will measure our progress towards achieving our common goal. Our vision looks to fair, green, innovative, and altogether sustainable development for resilient and connected rural areas and communities. Thank you, and looking forward to discussing the conclusions and outputs with you on Friday. All the best.
Thank you very much, Vice President Suica. And I know, as you said, you'll be joining us again on Friday. We look forward to hearing your reflections on the outcomes of our discussions during the week then. So thank you, Vice President Suica. Now, during the week, we'll hear interventions from a number of rural stakeholders, some testimonials for their visions of Rural 2040. Now, look out for those during the week. But we asked a couple of them to join us live today. And first of all, I want to introduce Christina Ernahad from a Swedish Rural Business Association. Christina, thanks for joining me. So the question I've got a couple of questions for you today. But first of all, the first question I would have for you is, What are your aspirations for rural Europe in 2040?
Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all. My aspirations for 2040 is that by then we will have done the fundamental work of moving towards sustainable societies, made this big transition work, and we've left behind the idea of urbanization as a driver of development, and are now building communities based on the understanding that we must be part of the ecosystem and live in balance with it. In other words, that's, as I see it, rural knowledge and rural perspectives that are fundamental for a truly sustainable approach in society.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Christina. As you know, I'm going to come back to you with a second question, but that'll be just a little bit later on. I know you're going to rejoin us. So what I'd like to do next is I'm going to hopefully see that online. Joining me is from the Ministry of Agriculture in Portugal, Maria Deseo Antunes, who is going to say a few words in Portuguese just about their own perspective. Maria, are you able to join us? Welcome.
Muito obrigada. É um gosto estar aqui com todos vós. Agradeço o convite, até porque o desenvolvimento rural é uma das prioridades que definimos para a presidência portuguesa para este semestre. Aliás, muito atentos que estamos à visão da Comissão para o Desenvolvimento Rural, porque queremos reforçar o papel da agricultura no combate ao abandono dos territórios, desenvolvendo práticas mais sustentáveis e ligadas à produção biológica e contribuindo para uma Europa mais resiliente e mais verde. São, aliás, 4 prioridades complementares que definimos e que colocam a agricultura na resposta à recuperação europeia da pandemia. Para além do desenvolvimento rural, também a segurança frente da nossa intervenção. E claro está, a reforma da política agrícola comum, sendo um instrumento essencial para garantir esta agricultura que queremos mais sustentável e mais competitiva, é determinante. E queremos uma reforma da PAC que se revela fundamental para promovermos uma transição ambiental e digital, que contribua para o desenvolvimento das zonas rurais, mas também para o reforço estrutural do sistema agroalimentar europeu, garantindo a nossa autonomia estratégica. Em Portugal, quase 90% dos territórios das zonas rurais têm uma ocupação agroflorestal, onde a resiliência da agricultura é essencial para o desenvolvimento equilibrado destas áreas e para a coesão socioeconómica do país. O governo português tem no desenvolvimento rural uma das suas prioridades estratégicas, ambicionando combater assimetrias e assegurar igualdade de oportunidades. São instrumentos vários que mobilizamos para este fim, designadamente aquilo que diz respeito aos pacotes de apoio à recuperação pós-Covid, como é o caso do Plano de Recuperação e Resiliência e do Next Generation. E estão em linha com outras estratégias e políticas públicas já em curso. Por exemplo, o Programa Nacional de Regadio, como sabem, Portugal, assim como os outros países do Mediterrâneo, precisam de regadio para poderem ser competitivos, para garantirem a ocupação dos territórios, nomeadamente dos territórios mais rurais, e fixar pessoas. O apoio aos circuitos curtos, às cadeias curtas e à organização da produção, que queremos que seja cada vez mais inovadora, que aproxime o agricultor do consumidor, o Estatuto da Agricultura Familiar e a Agenda de Inovação para o setor, que define metas e ambição e ações concretas para a década que já iniciamos. E é neste quadro que não queremos nem podemos ignorar o facto. A atividade agrícola tem de proporcionar rendimento para que possam ser produzidos alimentos a preços justos para os consumidores, que possam contribuir para o desenvolvimento destas zonas rurais que aqui hoje nos convocam nesta discussão, para o combate ao despovoamento, para uma gestão ativa da ocupação do território, prevenindo inclusivamente os fenómenos ligados aos incêndios e às alterações climáticas também. O rendimento agrícola é gerado sobretudo, mas de modo insuficiente pelo mercado. Há uma parte muito significativa da produção, o rendimento gerado pelo mercado não permite acomodar a volatilidade, nem remunerar adequadamente os fatores de produção, nem os ecossistemas, os serviços pelos ecossistemas. Situação que, na ausência de políticas de apoio ao rendimento e de investimento no quadro da PAC, potenciaria a saída da atividade em grande escala, colocando em causa a produção dos alimentos. Veja-se, se não fosse a política agrícola comum, talvez a agricultura não tivesse uma resposta como teve a esta crise pandémica. Não podemos esquecer que cerca de 90% dos apoios da PAC destinam-se aos territórios rurais. E é esta relevância que se torna muito clara neste tempo de pandemia e que permitiu e continua a permitir ao setor encarar, superar, adaptar-se aos grandes constrangimentos que foram colocados. E a aplicação da PAC tem ainda uma influência muito direta na diversificação das culturas, na manutenção das pastagens, na gestão da água no solo, no uso sustentável de fertilizantes e pesticidas, na redução do risco de incêndio e da propagação de algumas pragas e doenças. Aliás, no Conselho, hoje à tarde, vamos ter 2 pontos de discussão relativamente a isto mesmo, para promovermos as boas práticas da fitossanidade em complemento ou em substituição da luta química. E contribui também para a preservação da biodiversidade, quer doméstica, quer selvagem, associada a muitos sistemas agrícolas e florestais, nomeadamente nos que assentam em características de alto valor natural, como é o caso da baixa densidade de utilização de fatores de produção e na presença de vegetação seminatural. É ainda uma ferramenta mobilizada no arranque ou na continuidade dos processos de digitalização das zonas rurais. E tal como tenho defendido na agenda de inovação que referi, que estamos a implementar, a tecnologia, o conhecimento são parte da solução, quer para uma agricultura mais sustentável, quer para os necessários processos de adaptação às alterações climáticas. E é por isso imprescindível que possamos apostar na capacitação, na conectividade destas zonas rurais, nomeadamente através da cobertura com banda larga, que permita aos gestores do território aproveitarem todas as suas potencialidades, inovando, contribuindo para um uso mais eficiente dos recursos, integra os sistemas de irrigação sustentáveis e a agricultura irrigada, que desempenham uma função essencial de suporte a determinados sistemas agrícolas, sendo em muitos casos o fator-chave da sua sustentabilidade económica e na adaptação dos territórios às alterações climáticas. São também, por isso, essenciais para o desenvolvimento das zonas rurais e gestão do seu território, que sem este tipo de recurso passariam provavelmente por processos de abandono do uso do solo. E não desistimos de encontrar soluções. Em zonas rurais, onde a estrutura fundiária se tem apresentado como um problema, uma gestão de solo sustentável, continuamos a criar mecanismos para passar para um planeamento à escala da paisagem, para uma gestão do solo também à mesma escala. Mas se a atividade agroflorestal é importante, o desenvolvimento dos territórios rurais deve apoiar-se também no surgimento de novas atividades com potencial de crescimento económico, e a agricultura tem que ser um elemento catalisador neste quadro, pela ligação à agroindústria, ao turismo, à cultura, aos produtos regionais, à restauração, à gastronomia, num contexto promotor do rejuvenescimento, da inclusão e da igualdade de género, tendo sempre em atenção os princípios da bioeconomia, da economia circular, da silvicultura sustentável, depósitos de oportunidades que Portugal tem que saber explorar cada vez melhor. As novas exigências societais refletidas nos domínios alimentar e da saúde, da proteção do ambiente, do bem-estar animal, da fitossanidade ou do combate ao desperdício alimentar podem e têm de ser encaradas como desafios positivos e que sejam o garante do nosso futuro individual e coletivo. Para além de potenciarem atividades complementares, alavancas de processos inovadores da produção primária, promovendo a redução de custos e aumentando o valor de mercado gerado, contribuindo para sistemas alimentares mais sustentáveis e assentes em relação de maior transparência e confiança entre os produtores e os consumidores. E o desenvolvimento rural é uma prioridade e é parte fundamental desta resposta, que são as novas exigências que decorrem dos tempos que vivemos. São desafiantes, que são marcados por um fator de desconhecimento, por uma pandemia que veio acelerar processos e corroborar a urgência de uma ação coletiva e comprometida. Por isso, definimos como lema para esta nossa presidência: é tempo de agir. Estou certa que a nova política agrícola comum será com certeza um alicerce para esta transição justa e inclusiva num setor essencial ao futuro da União Europeia, onde não queremos que ninguém fique para trás. Contamos convosco. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada, many thank you for that intervention. Very important to have today the perspective of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. Thank you for taking your time. I know it is rather precious to you today. So thank you for that intervention. And now I'm going to very quickly, as again, turn to rural stakeholders. So we are joined by another rural stakeholder, and that is a Croatian young farmer. So we have Vedrana Politar, who is going to join us. And I'm going to ask Vedrana, thank you, and I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked to Christina. So what are your aspirations for rural Europe in 2040?
Hi, everyone. Okay. I hope that by 2040 there will be no more harmful pesticides, because we must save our flora and fauna, especially bees. Bees are very important because they pollinate flowers and increase income. Besides, we get more quality honey.
Thank you for that, Vedrana. So we've heard what their aspirations are from Christina and Vedrana, and what's going to come next is, after the next intervention, I'm going to ask them what specific actions they're going to take. But now, to round out our political interventions, I am delighted to be joined by the European Commissioner for Agriculture, Janusz Wojciechowski. Good afternoon, Commissioner Wojciechowski. I'm glad you can join us.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for invitation. The European Union's rural areas are home to 134 million people and cover more than 80% of the European Union's territory. They provide us all with food and sustainable raw materials. They help us manage water, soils, biodiversity, and carbon sinks. Their landscape provide room for recreation and support numerous ecosystems. They matter to all of us. But many of our citizens feel that the role and importance of our rural areas are underappreciated. Territorial inequalities are still a reality. Compared with urban areas, rural regions face greater challenges of depopulation, aging, and limited access to services and infrastructure. The public consultation, which we will present as a part of our discussions this week, demonstrates that many of our citizens and stakeholders want greater recognition and appreciation of what rural areas mean and do for all of us. Over 56% of respondents consider that the needs of rural areas are not well reflected in our policies. Better infrastructure, particularly public transport was the most popular demand for inclusion in the European Commission as European Commission's long-term vision for rural areas. I'm not surprised because the transport exclusion of the rural areas is important problem, long time, and problem which is more and more serious in many parts of Europe. More than 50% of those taking part in the consultation described better infrastructure as the most pressing need. Another 43% said that there was an urgent need for access to basic services such as water and electricity, as well as banks and post offices. These are issues we must take seriously, and there is a new impetus to do so in this commission. President Ursula von der Leyen was very clear in her last State of the Union speech about the importance we give to addressing the challenges faced by rural areas. As part of our guidelines for the recovery and resilience plans, we have already asked member states to take into account the rural-urban gaps. More recently, as a part of our 2030 digital targets, we have reaffirmed the goal of a society where geographical distance matters less. People should be able to work, learn, interact with public administration, make use of healthcare and transport systems, participate in democratic life, be entertained or just meet up anywhere in the EU. That includes rural and remote areas. Our task is to implement Article 174 of the treaty, which stipulates that particular attention should be paid to rural areas in reducing regional disparities. This is precisely the purpose of the long-term vision, which I will be developing together with Commissioner Ferreira under supervision of the Vice President Suica. We need a strong vision for our rural areas and their future, a vision that can provide all of us with an ambitious yet realistic idea of we want them to look by 2040. Our aim here is to review the public consultation and start working on an action plan to make sure that over the next 20 years, the attractiveness of rural areas will be built on improved services, digital connectivity, and greener farming. This week, I expect us to start shaping what such a long-term vision should be. It should contribute to promoting the creation of jobs, upgrading infrastructure and mobility, attracting and retaining individuals, especially young ones, and giving them the opportunity to learn new skills. Our rural areas should capitalize on their unique characteristics, recognizing the specific role of agriculture and agri-food sector, while also emphasizing the importance of other elements relevant for their future, such as energy, tourism, and the circular economy. Clearly, the success of rural development is not just a matter of European policies. All levels of governance, national, regional, local, stakeholders, local entrepreneurs, and project holders are key players and should engage in this debate. This long-term vision will go beyond agriculture or demography or an individual policy. We need a new rural pact that brings together all relevant stakeholders and all relevant policies. I want our long-term vision to improve synergies and complementarities between European Union policies and European Union funds to better address the specific and very diverse needs of our rural areas. This is the message Vice President Suica, Commissioner Ferreira, and I conveyed the member states in a letter last June. We need to ensure that all our efforts pull in the same direction, ensuring proper autonomy of various economic activities, including sustainable agricultural production. I look forward to the results of this week's discussions, and I wish you fruitful debates. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wojciechowski. And I know that you will do your best to follow and to join the rest of the discussions during the week as much as your agenda will allow. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for those words. So I'm going to return to our two stakeholders and both together at this time. And a second question for them, which is perhaps a little more challenging if I can speak to Christina and Vedrana once more. Starting with Vedrana, but the same question for you both. What action is needed now? And what is your role individually in taking us there? Vedrana first.
Okay, let's see. I think that we need to turn to ecological agriculture as much as we can. Next year, I'm also going to start ecological agribusiness on about 150 hectares. I will grow organic corn, wheat, sunflower, soya. I think that's it. Okay, we have another problem. And I want to say, we have really modern mechanization, but we don't have enough people who work with that. In my country, last few years, we have an immigration trend when young people going to another country, to another more developed country like Germany or Italy. And in this country, they have many girls like my age who work in agribusiness. But in Croatia, we don't have these situations. I must say, in my social media, there are videos and about me and how I'm working on my farm. And some videos have about 2 million views. And I think this is a good way to show people that today agriculture, it's not extremely hard job, especially for women. So I think that we need more women in agriculture.
Okay, I'll warn you now, you might have more than 2 million views after today, Vedrana. And Christina then, same question to you. What actions are you likely to take? What are you going to do?
The mute button. I would say that I think with that we need to drop the urban norm. We talk a lot about that in Sweden. The belief that the urban values are the best values and that rural knowledge is something outdated and of no value today. I think it's the exact opposite. The future is rural, and that's the attitude we need to work on and plant. And I think that's very connected to what Vedrana said as well. So I will continue to do what I already do, to live where I live, create my life and business here, give my children the perspectives that I didn't get while I grew up in this place. Give them the feeling and knowing that rural life comes with lots of opportunities and have a very important role to play for a way forward. And to actively show what a modern rural life is today and what it's about.
Okay, thank you to you both. I think you're both expressing that you're trying to be the change you want to see in the world, and that's a really good perspective to bring in at this stage. So thank you. I know it's not always easy to share such an auspicious panel, but thank you for your interventions. So we've had these stakeholder perspectives, we've had the political framing, of what this week is about. And thanks to all for that introduction, to Vice President Suica, to Commissioner Wojciechowski, to Maria de Seo Antunes from the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the EU. I want to turn now to a different perspective, which is going to be introduced by Doug O'Brien. Doug O'Brien is president of the National Cooperative Business Association in the USA, and he's going to give us a presentation with some reflections on what they're doing in his rural perspective. And then we'll bring in Michal Dumitru, Deputy Director General from DG Agri, for a little bit of an exchange between the two. So Doug, thank you for joining us. I know it must be quite early where you are.
David, so good to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation today. I give the Commission a lot of credit for this type of forum, and I particularly appreciate the practitioners in Croatia and Sweden and the action-oriented commitment to the future of rural places. So I have a few slides. I think we can bring those up. I'll go through these quickly because I really look forward to a conversation with my friend Michal in just a little bit. In these slides, I'll talk I'm going to present a few data points about the United States, just to give you a sense of really how similar that the opportunities and challenges, I think, relative to the EU. We'll talk, I'll just make some observations why rural policy is important. I'll go through those quickly because I've heard from both your political leaders and the rural citizens many of the same themes. I'll talk about a few ideas of some key strategies, some policy strategies to get to 2040. You know, what's the bridge? How do we get there? And then I'll end with a specific example in the field that I currently work in. So next slide. First of all, just a quick moment, National Cooperative Business Association in the United States of America. That's where I work now. We're the apex association for all kinds of cooperatives in the US, including rural electric cooperatives here in the United States. Most rural people, about almost 50 million people in the United States, they receive their electricity from utilities that they own and control through the cooperative business model. We also have a very major agriculture cooperative sector, major, we call them credit unions, the consumer financial, the housing co-ops, worker co-ops. So I get to work with all of these folks now. Right before I came to NCBA-CLUSA about 4 years ago, I worked in the White House, in President Obama's White House, and worked at the US Department of Agriculture before that. Next slide, please. So this slide, and I know it's impossible to read probably, but I just want to pause and talk about the diversity. In this case, it's racial diversity in the United States. Of course, there's, part of that is cultural diversity as well. The different colors represent where there's at least 20% of particular types of groups of people. Most of it there you'll see is in green. That's where the vast majority of people are white. Down in the Southeast, you'll see the orange. That's where at least 20% of the population of those areas are African American. Towards the South Central, those are where there's a lot of folks from Latino or Hispanic heritage. You'll see sprinklings of pink. Those are our Native Americans, our First Nation people here in the United States. And then the yellow is just where there's at least 20% of a mix of people. So it's a very diverse place in the United States, in rural places.
Okay, I think we've lost the video very briefly from Doug O'Brien. Let's see if we can try and get him back. While we're doing that, can I remind you that you can put questions to Doug O'Brien, and we'll hear in that exchange also from Michal Dumitru. But there's a very important question to do there, or a very important piece of advice we need to give you, and that is you need to use the option of all panelists and other attendees option when you're doing that. So unless, I'm just going to say unless we have any return from Doug O'Brien back into the chat, I'm sure we can patch him back in. Okay. So I have with me Mihail Dumitriu, Deputy Director General from DG Agri. Very difficult because we lost Doug at a kind of key point, Mr. Dumitriu, to ask you any immediate reflections. But that was going to be my question to you immediately after his chat. From anything that you're recognizing, that racial diversity is quite different, I imagine, from what we experience in Europe. Any kind of immediate reflections that you had?
Well, it's a pity that we lost Doug because I saw his presentation. It's quite interesting. And, I sometimes in the past, I collaborated with Doug O'Brien a long time. I've been with him in the OECD business on rural area. When some years ago we organized the usual OECD Rural Development Conference in Tennessee. And I had the opportunity also to discover myself the rural realities of United States of America. But then I also took the advantage and invited him in the Cork when we organized the big Cork gathering, and we assessed the first Cork declaration, and then there was a second declaration. And Doug has inspired us because at the time he was acting as the White House the chair of the White House Rural Council, and we even contemplated at that moment about the utility of such council, in Europe. And because even today we are discussing and we are talking about the vision, the long-term vision for rural area, and we are thinking that we need a better coordination of policies and instruments. And my commissioner mentioned very clearly that all the policies and all the instruments, they have also to look to the needs in the rural area. I mean, there are certain differences between us and other parts of the world, but there are common challenges. And I think for me, it was quite curious to discover that in other parts of the world, and I'm referring especially the developed country, but also the less developed countries, we have common challenges. I mean, if I look to the demographic challenge, I think this is a common challenge in Europe, in the States. It might be also in Asia, in Japan, or in other parts of the world. And we need to address this very carefully. Because in Europe the population is getting old. We have to improve the attractivity of rural areas. We have to make these territories more attractive for people to come and live and work. We have to try to preserve as much as possible the people that are there not to live. Therefore, we have to offer them the same conditions like the urban area offered to them. We want to preserve the women in rural area because they are very important to be there. We have to create for them the conditions to act on equal footing with the men and to start a business, to have all the services necessary for the children. We have also to offer very good health and education services. Of course, we are talking in Europe, and I wanted to challenge a little bit Doug. Unfortunately, I love him. About our, let's say, obsessive engagement in the green transition, because in the States there was a different discussion until recently. But I think at the level of society, they are also having this concern and this preoccupation and this engagement of the people. And of course, we need to engage all the stakeholders in the rural area to participate in this transition, because it's very important, and we have plenty of opportunities in rural area to participate in this green transition. And I think we have to unlock the potential of rural area and to drive this potential and all these assets we have in rural area to contribute to the future growth, economic growth model in Europe. We are talking about the knowledge-based economy. I had a point where I could have, find the common ground with Doug, because I know, for instance, that many actors in agriculture and rural economy, they are a little bit reluctant on sharing data. And in his presentation, I don't know if I should advance on his presentation. He also mentioned the importance of data as one of the very important raw material we are going to manage in rural economy for the future. And I think this requires two things. This requires a very good infrastructure, and we are talking about broadband, and we are talking about all the digital technologies, and then it requires skills. And then we have public policy, they have to work on these two directions. Well, I could continue to develop on this, but I don't know. I will stop. I will stop here, and I don't know if we have any chance to get it back.
We are trying to. Thank you very much, Mr. Dimitri. We are trying to reconnect with Doug O'Brien and get him to come back online. But you're right, because you reflected on his presentation as you know, we will be able to share at the very least, even if we don't manage to reconnect with him. We don't know what the connection problem has been, but we'll be able to share his presentation. And you're absolutely right. He picked up on the points of depopulation, which is heaviest from the most remote rural areas. He picked up on the points of poverty in rural areas. And perhaps there's a little bit of a question there, Mr. Dimitri. Anything that he spoke a lot, and you've mentioned it as well, about equity, bringing up the equity in the US. That's also an issue for Europe, isn't it?
Yes, and I think this is one of the reasons we want to have this rural vision, long-term rural vision, because we have more and more people from rural area. First of all, they feel left behind. And because they feel left behind by society, by policies, they started to have different options, and even political options, which are not usual policy options they used to have. So they may orient themselves toward more extremist, let's say, political ideologies, which is not good for society, for themselves. But they are right to say we need more attention, and we have to pay more attention, because if we look, there is the poverty gap is higher in rural areas. So we need to address this issue. We need to look to income gap. We need to support the creation of quality jobs in rural area. We have also to address the issue of the big gap of income in farming. We still have in Europe a very big gap of income in farming. This is the reason why we continue in the common agricultural policy to use one of the main instruments, which is income support. And we want these people also to make a life out of the farming, and this gap to be covered by the society. But in the same time, we are asking these people to contribute more and more to public services. And they are quite engaged in delivering public services. They are quite engaged in managing the natural resources and in preserving biodiversity. Now we are talking more and more, and I was very glad to listen to the young ladies that they would like to engage in a greener. I see Doug is back. In a greener agriculture. I mean, this is the tendency. We have a strategy now to move towards the Green Deal and towards an economy carbon neutral by 2050.
Okay, what I suggest we do then, Mr. Dimitri, and brilliant from recovery and response to our presentation cut halfway through. Doug, I'm going to patch you back in very briefly. We do have a little bit of time. And I see that the wonders of technology, you've managed to rejoin on your phone, I think. And that's okay. We'll work with it and live with it. Why? Let's think about the exchange, because what Michal Dimitri was asking was more about the green transition. It was the question he was going to put to you anyway. And I wanted to, if you want to pick up on any points, of course we can share your presentation, but perhaps we might just go to that element of exchange to kind of get us through for the next few minutes. But yeah. So what would your reaction, maybe Mr. Dimitri, you might want to rephrase that. He was asking what the US is doing in terms of green transition, or rejoining that conversation globally.
Yeah, well, I can take that up, and I want to apologize for the technical difficulty. Even I'm in an urban area, and even in an urban area, sometimes it's not reliable. On the green transition, so the new administration, the Biden administration, has made climate change one of its 4 pillars, and is very focused on that. They're looking at rural areas as one of the key places that really need to participate. And I think it goes to one of the larger points that I had intended to make in my presentation, that rural places have many assets that national, local, and international policy need to really recognize. And these assets are not to be exploited or extracted, but these assets, must be understood, because the big solutions that we all seek, and in this question, we're talking about climate, we're not going to be able to solve them without rural stakeholders, without those carbon sinks, without rural people taking on new ways of producing agriculture, of transport, of engaging in their economy in virtual platforms like this. So with those assets, I think it's really critical that rural people be part of the conversation, just like today, in really meaningful ways. Not only in the democratic process, but in the economy. Through things like cooperative businesses or other types of mutual businesses where people own, control, and benefit, from the engagement in the economy.
Okay, thank you for that, Doug. So because of the technical glitch, we've probably run just about out of time, but Mr. Dimitri, did you have any questions, anything remaining that you wanted to ask to Doug O'Brien?
Yeah, I'll be very curious, because I know Doug in his previous capacity that now he's leading one of the biggest organization, cooperative. And I mentioned because in his presentation he mentioned this idea that in the future managing data will be one of the generator of value in rural economy.
Right.
And I was thinking, and I know this from other conferences, other meetings with academics, with politicians, that the rural actors sometimes they are still afraid of sharing data or putting data together for different reasons. And I think that your organization is very well placed to manage this. And I would like to know, from the perspective of the Union of Cooperatives, how can you work with your members and use your clients to make this process, to smooth this process? I mean, there are several projects and examples in Europe. They are, I would say, incipient. They start to work, but I think we still have this problem for the data, for the big, let's say, advantage of using data for the future, which is going to be one of the main driver of economic development in the future.
Yeah, I think it's such an important question. I'm glad you brought it up as maybe almost a final point. So from my perspective, in 100 years ago, the most important commodity from rural areas was perhaps corn, perhaps milk. Today, the most important commodity, by that I mean the commodity where the most value will be captured, is probably data, information about the way things are grown, information about how they're distributed, information about the impacts on climate that certain activities have. Now, I'm a huge advocate for rural people to be forward-looking and to work together to make the most value of that information, and very importantly, to be able to control that information. And this is what cooperatives do. This is what cooperatives do for agriculture commodities. They allow people to come together so that they have more bargaining power in the market. It's the same thing with information, and this information also, to get to what we need to do on climate change, we need this data, and rural people need to have more control and are able to capture the value from the data.
Okay. Thank you very much to you both. I could listen to this conversation for quite some time, but unfortunately we've kind of run out of time. But one important thing is to say thank you to you both, especially for dealing with the challenge, but also that we will post, of course, Doug O'Brien's slides on the platform so that everyone can see them. So thank you both for your intervention. So that brings us to the end of the first part of the Rural Vision Week. We've framed what the challenges are, and we're going to move on and hear more about the state of play in some of the background preparatory work, some of the consultations and the workshops that Vice President Suica and Commissioner Wojciechowski were talking about. And these consultations launched by the Commission for building with stakeholders the long-term vision. And that's what we are going to be doing this week to inspire our own discussions and the working plenary, which takes place in just a little over 15 minutes. But before we close, let's just remind ourselves of how this process started when the new Commission College took up office at the instigation of President von der Leyen.
The countryside is my home. That is where my roots are. And I must say, this is where I would like to see my children raise their children, surrounded by the colors and the sounds of nature. So Europe's countryside is part of who we are. Europe's beauty wouldn't be the same without the green of our valleys and hills. Europe's cuisine wouldn't be the same without the quality food that our farmers grow. And Europe's civilization wouldn't be the same without our culture, our traditions, the festivities in the rural area, its hardworking spirit. Europe wouldn't be whole without its countryside. Life in Europe's rural areas is changing. Droughts and floods have hit more frequently and violently. 3 out of 4 European farmers say that climate change already has an impact on their daily work. Globalization exposes farmers to tougher competition, although it also offers new markets for food and other products. And too many bright young people are leaving to chase jobs and dreams in the city. And infrastructure remains a problem. Where my family lives, I must say we have more dead spots than potholes. And when I want to make a phone call, I know exactly which room I have to go to in order to make the connection. But the tide could be turning if we make it turn together for the better of all of us. Because I'm convinced there's only one Europe. And we can turn the tide together, cities and countryside, east and west and north and south. We see that new solutions and new opportunities are already emerging from within Europe's rural areas. There's a new generation of farmers who are rediscovering traditional farming and food production while bringing innovation to their daily work with mobile apps and using data from satellites. A new kind of tourism is spreading, more respectful of nature and local communities. And families across Europe are now choosing local food production because they value quality and sustainability above anything else. So for millions of Europeans, progress means going back to our nature and rural roots with a brand new spirit. The coronavirus experience could be reinforcing this trend. Our mission is to accompany positive change, to invest in it, to make it kind of the antidote of the negative trends of recent years and decades. Through the years, the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP, has been Europe's response to the needs of farmers and rural communities, and we must make sure that the new CAP mirrors today's reality and the needs of today's farmers. We know that we cannot act the same way in Andalusia as in Lapland. And even within the same country, different farms have different needs. So we need a policy that understands local needs and works for all, large and small, at all corners of the Union. New resources will come from our recovery plan, the so-called Next Generation EU. It is a plan for our countryside's next generation too. Young people from countryside should be empowered to follow their dreams without leaving their land. And for that, they need good jobs, they expect the right education, they deserve good digital and physical infrastructure. This is what we can do from here in Brussels. Give a vision for the future, set a direction, make resources available, and work together to identify new opportunities, explore new solutions, and replicate the successful ones elsewhere. The future of Europe's local realities can only be shaped locally, and with rural communities, local authorities, and everyone who cares about the future of Europe's countryside, will lead to a new strategy, a new vision for rural Europe. This vision cannot be prepared in the city for the countryside. So I'm not here to present a ready-made plan for rural communities. Today it is about your ideas and your contribution. This is so important. It won't just be a vision for rural Europe, but a vision from and by rural Europe, what I'm wishing for. So the European Union will be at the side of the rural community that want to shape a healthy and thriving future. We will be there with support and resources, with a new common agricultural policy, with the European Green Deal and Next Generation EU. We will be with you because a stronger and healthier Europe begins with a prosperous countryside. It's the right moment to listen, to gather all these ideas, and then to embark on a common endeavor. And thank you very much for having invited me to this webinar.
So there you have it. We've framed the perspective. It's now time for you to get involved. That ends a high-level opening plenary. My thanks to Vice President Suica, Commissioner Wojciechowski, to Maria de Sousa Antunes, Minister of Agriculture in Portugal, and especially to Doug O'Brien and Michal Dimitri for coping with the technical challenges. And a little word to say thank you as well to our rural stakeholders. Really brought us back to the ground, to Christina and to Vidrana. So stay connected. Now, what comes next is just 10 minutes away. It's a working plenary. And here's your chance to really get involved and help us imagine the future of Europe's rural areas. I look forward to seeing you very shortly. Bye for now. Hello and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. If this is the first time you're joining us in Rural Vision Week. My name is David Lamb. I'm from the ENRD Contact Point, and I'm going to be moderator for this session, which is more your chance to get involved. We're going to discuss parts of the stakeholder consultations that have been taking place, the workshops, the responses that have been made, and some forecasting that's been made in terms of how our rural vision might work. Okay, we're going to come to all those components. I've said now's your chance to get involved. We want you to use the chat wherever possible. Make sure you make your responses in the chat to all panel and participants when you do so. That's how you can put your questions across and get more involved. It's definitely time to get interactive. You can also use the Q&A area of the platform that we're on right now for Rural Vision Week. You can also get involved through one other means, which is we are doing a Menti cloud. A word cloud through Mentimeter. So you use, and we'll try and post it in the chat very shortly, www.menti.com. And there's a code in there, and it is 70402749. We're going to put that in the general chat. That's 70402749. The question is this: as Rural Vision Week starts, what 3 words, keywords, would be central to your vision for the future of our rural areas in 2040? Okay, so before we get on with the agenda for today, just a quick reminder of this session will be working language, will be English, and interpretation will be provided into English, French, German, Italian, Polish, and Spanish. Please use the hashtag Rural2040 and hashtag Rural Vision EU on Twitter. And one final little call just now, make sure we are going to later in this week have the Rural Inspiration Awards. And we want you to get involved in the voting process for that. The voting for the 20 finalists is live now, and you can get involved by casting your vote for whichever one you think deserves it. So get involved with that. That voting will close at midnight on Wednesday. So I think we're going to start now with just a little bit of a reminder of the agenda for the overall week of Rural Vision Week, to remind us what's going to be happening. Because what we've got today is the working plenary. We will have, starting tomorrow, workshops that are looking at getting into more of the detail of what we're going to be discussing. And you can use the platform to navigate your way through that. We'll also have a marketplace where you can look at a lot of different initiatives and projects and member state-led initiatives. And we have some fringe workshops on Thursday where there are a few different organizations who will be presenting and discussing their own specific topics. I've mentioned Rural Inspiration Awards on Thursday, and we'll bring it all together in a closing plenary on Friday, which will have a session and a working session to try and get all those ideas brought together. But what are we doing today? So we've got the agenda for today, which will be 4 different presentations first of all, from Maria Gaffo Gomez Tamayo, who will give us a perspective of the stakeholder consultations and the results from that. We then got from the European Commission Joint Research Centre, we have Maciek Czechofovich. I'm going to get that name wrong, and I apologize to Maciek because I know him and like him very well, but he's going to give us that perspective. We have Zélie Pépiette from the European Commission and Paul Soto from the ENRD Contact Point, who will be discussing a lot of those stakeholder workshops, the package that we went out to stakeholders with, and the responses that we've got from that. So what I want to move on to now, though, is Rural Voices. So we have been asked, we wanted to share some of the responses we've had in the form of word clouds that were made. And there were a few points that came across in the consultations with some words, inspiring words that we'd like to share. But first of all, we're just going to quickly screen the agenda. So I'm going to ask the studio to screen that now. Okay, so there's a reminder of the agenda for the rest of the week. So as I mentioned, and that's just me working out which bit comes first, we have a few reminders of the word clouds that came through as part of the consultations. So I think we're going to look at some of those just now. So there you have it. Yeah, they're not all in English, so I'm hoping that some of these will resonate with you in terms of some of the things that were coming through from at member state level, all the different word clouds that were run. And a lot of words, despite which language is your native, that we can all recognize: multiculturalism, languages, diversity, and many different phrases that resonated irrespective of which language they came through on. And that's just a little reminder of that before we move on to the core of our Rural Vision Week. But for that, what I do want to do is move over and introduce Maria Gaffo, because Maria is going to make us a presentation on the stakeholder consultation that we've been discussing just now. Maria, welcome and thank you.
Hello, David. Good afternoon. And I apologize for challenging you with difficult family names, but I think you managed quite well. Yes. So it is my pleasure to be with you this afternoon and with all the other people listening to present you these results of the public consultation that we have undertaken. And just to mention that we put a lot of importance and attention to this element, which we believe is the core of the vision. Next slide. So we have developed the vision building on these three elements. First, a strong analysis of documents, statistics, data, etc. Then a foresight exercise done with our colleagues from the Joint Research Center and also with the collaboration of the European Network of Rural Development. And then this element of the public consultation. Next. And as I mentioned, we attach a lot of importance to this element because, as the President von der Leyen just said in this video, we want a rural vision not for rural areas, but to be developed from and by the rural areas. And for this, we undertook a number of activities. Next one. And this is a very beautiful picture from Brussels. In this street, we have many commission buildings. Our office in DG Agriculture is almost at the end. But we do not want rural areas from Brussels. I think all of you would agree that it doesn't make sense if we tell to the rural people what are their problems. I think it is for the rural people to tell what are their problems and how can we support them and help them to address them. Next one. And this is why we undertook different consultation channels to try to seek these views from rural stakeholders as well as from regional and local authorities. In the first place, we undertook this online public consultation. And we also had done in August and September questions face-to-face to many people, close to 30,000 people through a Eurobarometer, including some specific questions for rural. We have also a stakeholders workshop toolkit that my colleague Zeli will present later on. And I think this is very, very interesting initiative that could be considered for the future, how to engage with rural stakeholders. We had also used the committees that we had in the Commission with the stakeholders, civil dialogue groups, as well as with member states and regional authorities. And then we have participated also in a number of events, I think more than 50, close to 3,000 people involved. And of course, now the Rural Vision Week, where we plan to present and then to finalize this public consultation phase to feed the communication. Next one. We started already almost a year ago. We published a roadmap. Then we have this Eurobarometer that I mentioned, and then all these other elements. So basically during a year, and then we plan to have the communication on the long-term vision for rural areas published in June of this year under the presidency, Portuguese presidency. As the minister just said, it's one of their priorities, and we will have still one debate during this presidency, and then I know that the Slovenian presidency is also very much interested, so we look forward to continue the debates. Next one. Next slide, please. Just to show the open public consultation results. And first, I would like to thank Ecoris that helped us very much to analyze these results. We got more than 2,300 replies, and most of them, more than 60%, come from citizens, not from association, authorities, or whatever. It is just individual citizens that wanted to reply. Around 1/3 of the respondents have a relation with the farming and food processing sector, and then almost 2/3 respondents come from rural areas. And this is something that it's a very good news from us, because we really wanted to reach these people that normally do not contribute so much to our consultations from Brussels. Next one. Yes, so citizens, rural stakeholders are in the center of the results. Next. The ideal rural area, we have just done this word cloud in different languages. And I was even thinking to ask everybody to put a word in the chat. It's good that they have done it through Menti, because I think we are around 1,000 people registered for this session, and it will be a bit crazy for ENRD colleagues. But this is the result we got for the public consultation. Next. And you see the words that appear with bigger font. So we have nature, we have sustainable, we have services, we have connected, infrastructure. And then there is also one word which is evident, is rural. So what is the ideal rural area? Rural. So it should keep its spirit. Next one. We have different blocks in the consultation, and the first one refers to rural areas today. And we ask, what are the most urgent needs in our rural areas? The number one, and this has been also mentioned by Commissioner Wojciechowski in his speech, is infrastructure, in particular transport. So access to services and facilities, it's also an important need. The third element is the economic needs. And then the fourth is the digital connectivity that also, as you can imagine in these terms of pandemic, has appeared as more important and very highly needed. Next one. Regarding the sectors contributing to ensure the economic sustainability of rural areas, the number one mentioned by the respondents is agriculture, followed by the agri-food sector, and also the local retails and the local tourism. There are some sectors like, for example, this digital economy or creative industry that so far do not appear very high, but probably this is going to be further developed in the future. Next one. The second block of the consultation refers to the rural areas tomorrow, and what will be the elements that would contribute to make these areas increase in 2040, which is the timing of the strategy. And the one that appear higher is, again, this provision of services, in particular health and education, followed by this fast and stable internet connection that it's quite challenging in rural areas, but as we saw also with the intervenant from the US, it's also the case in a number of urban areas as well. Social innovation also scores very high. And then there is one specific recommendation for farming. So it refers to sustainable farming practices that reduce the environmental footprint. So this is also in line with our intervenant from Croatia at the beginning of the discussion. Next one. Regarding the characteristics that make safe and vibrant communities and that could make the rural areas more attractive in the long term, again, we have the availability of care facilities and local and economic opportunities. But then there is one element related to democracy, which is the participation in decision-making and to have the rural voices heard in the decisions made by the political bodies. And the availability of local services and short supply chains also is considered as very relevant. Next one. The third block of the consultation referred to this governance in rural areas, and we put quite a strong question. So we asked the people participating in the consultation if they feel left behind by the society. And a majority said that this is not the case. So 60% consider that it is not the case, but still we have 30% that reply positively. Next one, and the situation, it's even more challenging in remote rural areas that, as you can see, the trend is different. So 56% of the people that reply and that are living in remote rural areas feel left behind by the society. The main reasons for replying to this refer to deteriorated infrastructure and services, and then as well also to not having the voice heard in the decision making in the rural areas. Next one. We ask also what could be the elements that we could include in the long-term strategy and action plan for the future of rural areas. And the number one priority considered is again the job opportunities, innovation and entrepreneurship, and then also again the access to infrastructure and services score high together with this digital connectivity. So on this, you can see that the three blocks are replying, going into the same direction. Next one. Asking also how we could, from Brussels, support rural areas in meeting the challenges and making the most of the opportunities. First, it is considered that the EU policy could contribute to provide economic and financial support. There is also one element of empowering the local communities. And I know that many people participating in the event today come from the local action groups and from LEADER. So this is considered probably a very useful and powerful tool that we can use to enhance the contribution in the EU policymaking. The third element that scored very high is that we were asked to improve the targeting of our policies to local needs, what it's known by rural proofing, and it was already proposed by stakeholders in the core conferences some year ago. Other actions also are related to cultural, economic, and environmental aspects. Next one. So just to sum up the key messages for the first block on the rural areas today: the need for access to transport and services, access to job opportunities, and access to fast internet. Also, the reasons that led the people to stay and to value rural areas refer to this higher quality of life that has been also, I think, increased because of the COVID pandemic that made the people look with new eyes to the rural areas. And the sense of belonging also. So this word rural that appear in the word cloud. Regarding the sectors, as I mentioned, agriculture, followed by also the local shops and retailers. But also one concern is that quality job opportunities are lacking. And I think special attention has to be put to improve that aspect. Next one. Regarding the rural areas tomorrow and to keep the attractiveness, landscape protection and climate adaptation and mitigation should gain more importance in the future. Then also, of course, in order to have the rural areas attractive, we have to pay particular attention to services, and I would say e-services, health and education, that can be secure only if we really put a big effort and push on the better internet connectivity. The third element is, again, this access to care facilities and economic opportunities with particular attention with the young people. Next one. On the governance, even if less than half of the respondents feel left behind, this number is higher for the remote rural areas. And looking on how to reach better with the people living in rural areas, it was also interesting to see that we asked if they considered that surveys like this one was a good tool or not. And I think there are other elements like these debates in rural areas that were much more appreciated. And then the main priorities for the EU to focus refer to this employment and innovation, access to infrastructure and services, and then again, the digital connectivity. Next one. So I have arrived to the end of my presentation, and I have put this beautiful picture of these three kids that in 2040, the timing of the strategy will be around 25, 30 years old. So all this work goes for them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Maria Gaffo. Can I ask, I don't have any questions in the chat just now, a little reminder that people can put their questions across, but I'll start at least to ask, are there any particular striking observations in terms of surprises in the stakeholder responses, or even in the kinds of stakeholders responding?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so on this, while I think in the open public consultation we didn't get any surprise, I was surprised by some of the replies that we got in a number of events. So for example, in one event that you organized in ENRD, and we asked the people, what is the rural vision for them? If you recall, the representative from Ireland read a poem. I was also in another event the other day with young Spanish people, and I asked them about what is the future of rural areas for them, and they speak about the sky full of stars. So I think it's very poetic, but this means that this is not just about data, it is also about feelings. And these feelings, I think, are at the core of the vision.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because I'm not getting any questions coming through from the chat just now, but I'll ask, if you'll forgive me, I'll ask one more question, because you mentioned it again. You've insisted on during the consultation process of local empowerment. Did you feel that the local stakeholders spoke up? Do you feel they were empowered? Did that come across for you?
Mm-hmm. I think this will link very nicely with the next presentation also by Zeli, because we, as you know, we facilitated and we try to put some packages available to the people so that they can organize the debates and send us the contributions, and we were very positively surprised by this input. But I don't want to disclose the presentation of Zeli, so I just want to recognize that in the Commission we try to be imaginative and try to see how we could use other means which are not the usual public consultation and tweets and all these things to reach. And I think we have a very, very good possibility in this channel.
Okay, well, thank you, and yeah, we'll be coming back to that point in the presentation that Zeli will make. For now, thank you very much, Maria Gaffo. Thank you for those enlightening perspectives you brought forward, and just to highlight to everyone that the PowerPoint presentation, will be made available online. So, another part of this overall process was made by the Joint Research Centre. So I'm going to then ask Maciej if he will join us now to just put across some of the points in his PowerPoint and his presentation that came from the study that was initiated and run by them. Maciej,
thank you,
David. Join us. Yes.
Thank you, David. So yes,
one second. You see, I'm being told, this is the beauty of technology. I'm told just before we come to you that we have a couple of little rural voices that we wanted to intersperse. So if you forgive me for one moment, because you heard from two rural stakeholders earlier who came and spoke live, but we've been collecting through this process a number of testimonials by video, and we'd like to just share one of those little segments just now.
Hi, I am Sandra from Latvia, and this is my rural. Here you can see a small part from my milking cow herd. In 2040, rural areas will be extremely modern, and we will be able to support ourselves even if global crisis. This is my rural.
Hi, I'm Giorgio from Alto Molise, Italy. This is my rural area with wind energy, forestry and a lot of agriculture. Would like to be able to access a lot of essential service online or locally by 2040. This is my rural.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Austria. I'm Claudia. With our youth project Jugendtankstelle, we offer a load of sports, social and green activities. This is our contribution to a diverse and colorful rural way of life. So before 2040, People growing up in urban areas will understand how much they need the countryside and how wonderful it is. This is my rural.
Είμαι ο Ραφαήλ, είμαι από την Κύπρο και αυτή είναι η δική μας αγροτική περιοχή με εύφορη γη, μακροχρόνια παράδοση στη γεωργία, έντονη γεωφάνεια αλλά και περιορισμένες πηγές νερού. Το 2040 ελπίζω οι καλλιέργειες μας να χρησιμοποιούν πέραν του 50% ανακυκλωμένο νερό για την άδρευση και 100% ενέργεια από ανανεώσιμες πηγές. Αυτή είναι η δική μας ύπαιθρος.
So yeah, we needed a little reminder of what diverse rural Europe looks like, and just a few stakeholder voices. You'll be seeing some more of those throughout Rural Vision Week. We're going to try and bring you those voices from the ground. So I'm going to try and bring back in Maciek now, and with apologies for launching and then delaying his presentation. I did want to hand over to you, Maciek, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, David. And it was a pleasure listening to the different voices. And I will also start with diversity because it's always kind of starting point for discussion at European level. But there also has to be some level of kind of abstraction that has to be done, which then goes back to the people all over Europe, and they rediscuss this again, and the diversity shows up again. So I think what I wanted to present is a bit of the element which Maria has mentioned, one of the elements of feeding the discussions on the visions, which is building exploratory scenarios. And with the next slide, I'll try to explain a bit more. So in the Competence Center on Foresight in the European Commission's Joint Research Center, we actually encourage dedicated work streams on foresight in all domains of EU policymaking, because they help us think differently about policies, think more openly about the policies. So in this case, we settled and agreed on exploratory scenarios because they show that diversity is not only the diversity today, but the diversity of today actually brings more diversity in tomorrow. And the more you can chart this diversity, the better decisions you can make today. And when we set to do a different kind of foresight exercise, we never do them alone. And in the next slide, I'll explain a bit who helped us. So we worked with the thematic group on the rural vision from the ENRD, and the group had also other roles, which Paul will explain later. But among them, we're actually helping to identify the drivers, create, enrich, and explore scenarios. And with that, I would like to help them, thank them very much for all their help, and they will be featuring in many of the and speaking in many of the discussions this week. We've worked in a interactive online workshops, which was challenging, but we got a lot of feedback and a lot of input that way. And so the result is a work on exploratory scenarios, which is a kind of dedicated work stream for the preparing of rural areas, vision for rural areas. But of course, we're not alone in the reflections on forward-looking elements. And on the next slide, you will actually see that many diverse projects, research projects on rural areas actually have a lot of forward-looking elements, and they have either developed scenarios or some other trend and future imagining perspectives, which also bring new elements. And we tend to say that, in fact, the more the better. There is no one set view of the future that we sanction. We actually want to expand the imaginaries around rural areas, and all these projects having their focus or more general help us do that. And in fact, the Sherpa project, which is there in the science policy interfaces, has prepared a very good overview of the forward-looking elements of some of the scenarios, which is very helpful to exactly expand that thinking about the future of rural areas. But with next slide, I'll return to our exercise. And so with the thematic group, we have actually discussed what are the main driving forces, and we wanted to create the core of our scenarios around two of those drivers that are actually considered very important for the future of rural areas, but at the same time reflect a strong uncertainty or just diversity of the future trajectories. So one of them is rural demography, and we have the two dimensions here of either growing rural population or decreasing rural population, and developing scenarios based on that. And on the next slide, the second basic driver is multi-level governance, or type of multi-level governance. On the one hand, we have the networked, well-coordinated, collaborative, with strong citizen participation. And in the other, more fragmented, with limited coordination, low policy coherence, and weaker citizen participation. So while these two are the drivers that form the core of the scenarios that we developed, there are a few other on the next slide. So the thematic group has actually pointed out to quite a few of significant drivers for rural areas. The climate change is definitely one of the most important. And here on this small chart, which probably is not visible too clearly, it actually comes from a PESETA-4 study, which is a joint research study on the impacts of climate change on the EU, and shows very clearly the diversity of impacts, but also what could they be in different scenarios, and what kind of policy measures could be taken. And of course, beyond climate change, there is a series of environmental, social, political, and economic drivers that form the basis of these scenarios as well. So next slide, I'll explain a bit about how we explore those driving forces to create the scenarios. And probably you then see with the exclamation marks, which are the key points I want to make before going ahead and actually explaining the scenarios. So it's not a forecast. These are not the future that we will, what we think will happen, that are actually set out to be real. They are neither visions. So they are not things that we would like to see, that we would like to find ourselves in the future. And they're not policy scenarios. So they are not developments which actually shape the policy towards a certain direction and in a certain trajectories. Rather, much as on the little chart that I have on the slide, we think of these main drivers and the different trajectories they can put the futures to actually create a wide multitude of potential futures. And we want to get a better understanding of that multitude of futures by pointing out to a few that are very diverse, to be able exactly to chart out this territory. And we chart out this territory because then we can expand our understanding of the concepts and of the ideas that we work with now, not only thinking about how they were shaped in the past or how we think about them now in the present, but how they could be actually shaped and understood in the many potential futures that could be out there. So given these caveats and in a broad exploration phase, with the next slide, I will move to the 4 scenarios. And here they are charted out in the 4 quadrants. So the top 2 are with population growth in rural area, the bottom ones with shrinking rural areas. On the right, they are the networked multi-level governance. On the left, the fragmented. And of course, we have given each of them a name. Now, this is probably always one of the trickiest parts of creating scenarios. And many people will disagree about the names, but it's not about the names. They are there for kind of shorthand discussions. what is behind them really is important to think about the trajectories of the drivers really. So I'll start with the top left, and on the next slide there's a brief explanation of the first scenario. So here we have population growth in rural area. We have new economic and other opportunities for people. We have innovation. We have growth and entrepreneurship opportunities that are expanding, very much like the many of the factors that came in the replies that Maria presented. At the same time, we have a kind of competing and fragmented governance systems that make this situation quite chaotic. There is much less sense of community and much more care for individual needs, the needs of peace, the needs of security, and quite a few tensions in this scenario around inequalities. First, given the different communities that clash, and also this NIMBY or not in my backyard attitude, with maybe more closed and gated communities, with looking at agriculture, but also other more traditional activities as a nuisance for the new arrivals. And the technologies then, and the digital is shaped very much around the kind of individual wants and needs of the population that is now in the rural areas. On the next slide, we have the second scenario, which is still with population growth, but it imagines very much a kind of coordinated, open governance, managed process in reply to this inflow of people to rural areas. This managed process is within the overarching theme of green transition, and in this way, the rural areas become a kind of prime prototyping or experimental space for real sustainable living. So there is a lot of focus on rural planning towards more nature-based, more circular economy, more sustainable lifestyles. And here the tensions are much less about inequalities, much more around values, about the constraints of the planning, about the need to actually manage very much the transition versus the freedom, the autonomy, and the technology and the digital is very much about mediating those two spheres, about actually making sure that the collaborative processes are processes that benefit everyone, and that the decisions that are taken are those that actually take people in the right direction. So these were the two population growth scenarios. The third scenario is actually on the next slide, is about shrinking rural areas. So there is less economic activity. There is less activity in general, so less critical mass for services, for rural living. But we are in a networked or coordinated and managed kind of governance, which leads us to a transition where local rural hubs emerge, which with the general shrinking population, they actually attract both rural and part of the urban population to actually maintain that rural fabric. Since those rural hubs are rather much more sparse and in between, there is a kind of combination of local collaboration, and they're very local in a way, but at the same time they are globally connected to the global value chains. So while focused on decentralization, self-organization, and the kind of do-it-yourself attitude, they still, the tension is more around the kind of local versus regional, and very much competition towards participating in the global, and the tension and the technology and the digital is really about the mediating between those different levels. And the fourth scenario that was developed, we are still in the shrinking rural areas. It's with the next slide, is is the one where actually there is fragmented governance, and there is little coordination, and everyone is left a bit for themselves. So the population is really attracted to the cities and bigger cities because that there are no other processes in a way, and there's almost no one in this scenario left in rural areas. This leads to large-scale land abandonment and land restructuring in a way. So towards more kind of automated, large-scale facilities for energy, for food, large-scale recreation or cultural areas for what is now almost exclusively urban population, and completely off-limit to people rewilding spaces which serve the environmental purposes. So in this scenario, the technology is really towards automation, towards better extraction and more innovative and extraction of those different raw materials from the rural areas, and the preferences are very much shaped by the cities. So these are the four scenarios. On the next slide, I'll try to not give a conclusion because it would be maybe premature to give a conclusion at the beginning of a week of deliberation, but to say that it's natural to think, I like this scenario, I don't like this scenario, and so on, but that is not the purpose we wanted. They're not visions, they're not preferences. What we wanted is to actually be able to look at all four scenarios and to actually think about the trajectories of the drivers and think about where in between of those the different rural areas could be actually developing, because it doesn't have to be one future for all. And finally, to start to rethink some of the concepts and some of the situations that we are discussing from that perspective, from a perspective of very kind of diverse futures. And if we think about this and we take all four scenarios at the same time, and for example, look at the kind of digitalization that is needed, or the kind of well-being that could be understood in all these four cases, and the kind of resilience that is needed in all those four scenarios, we start to get a more nuanced look and a broader understanding of each of those, which still remain key components of thinking about the future of rural vision. So with that, I hope this can be an interesting tool, as we said. So there is a kind of diversity versus abstraction level. I think I would hope that we can take this abstraction and actually bring it back and see the diversity in it, and see maybe a bit the rural futures differently with the help of foresight instruments. So we are preparing and finalizing a report that will have more details about this process. Some of it is already available as reports from the ENRD thematic groups, and I urge you to think about it, to use it as a way of thinking maybe differently and more broadly about the different possible futures before thinking about the vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maciek. And just a quick reminder to everyone that Maciek's slides, along with all the slides made by presenters, are available through the ENRD website. So because we had lots of rich detail in there, as we've had before, you can see all of that in the versions that were made available. Maciek, a couple of questions, if I may. First one, I know that the work of the Joint Research Centre has looked a lot at megatrends. Are there any megatrends you've been identifying which seem particularly relevant to this piece of work, to this long-term vision for rural areas?
Yes, thank you. So I think once we start the discussion, it's clearly kind of the demographics and the climate change which have emerged as something that needs to be considered. And in the process, we were actually in terms of especially climate change, it's important to think of resilience, of how these different setups would react to more or less catastrophic effects of climate change. So in a way, they are very much connected. But what I wanted also to mention is one maybe less obvious megatrend, which is the changing nature of work. And maybe we underestimate a bit how much our work has been changing and how much our roles also in work have been changing. So we expect not only in terms of actually what we do and the skills we will need in the future, but also in terms of, well, how we will work also physically. You know, exoskeletons, robots, all kinds of AI-driven technologies that are around it. But we will be working much differently with people. We will be working in very different organizations, maybe less hierarchical, less centered, with again changes in attitudes and changes in technology, allowing us for a much more kind of decentralized, autonomous work. And we will be also working in a more kind of empathetic and social spaces and in more kind of network ways. And I think that will shape also very much our lives. So apart from the ones that are clear, so climate change, demography, globalization, I think, you know, imagining how different our work and our position will be is something that is especially important. Thanks.
And something that struck me also just from that answer, as well as from your presentation, that was in terms of those rural scenarios that you talked about, do you think that the response by people to the COVID-19 pandemic has maybe nudged us more in one direction than it might have a year ago?
I think it does, but then it's too early to then speculate on long-term effects. But I think it has expanded very much our possibility to imagine something different. So this is what we have realized in Foresight. So things that beforehand would have been unthinkable, and we would be presenting scenarios which people would say, well, this will never happen. We are starting more and more thinking that, well, you know, things that we think unthinkable could very much be happening. And that has opened up a kind of different ways of understanding. So in terms of, for example, demography, we've seen the effects of the previous crisis, which the jury in a way is still out there, whether it had a kind of long-term effect on people moving to rural areas and moving back. In terms of maybe people wanting more space individually, that could be kind of nudging us in that direction as well. But on the other hand, you can always say it also tells us how interconnected we are. And since we are so interconnected, we have to find new ways of managing that interconnectedness. And maybe that is a kind of a nudge in a different direction. I think what is important is that we keep imagining all those possibilities at the same time, and then we start to work in different kind of collaborative ways, approaches that we want to take and where we want them to lead us. So that's maybe part of the answer.
Okay, thank you, Maciek. I'll have to confess to you, you've escaped any questions coming up in the chat. So I'll say thank you for that, and thank you for those reflections on that. So what we'll do is we want to now come back to some perspectives from stakeholders. So what I want to do once more is just give you another little compilation of some of those stakeholders' voices through the videos that they've submitted to us.
I'm Marta from the Sobrarbe in Aragon in the Spanish Pyrenees, a beautiful region where people live mainly from tourism, like our hotel or agriculture. In 2040, I hope many people will come to live here, create new projects, and enjoy a very nice quality of life. This is my rural.
I'm Peter from Czech Republic. This is my rural area with folklore traditions, with forest, meadows, vineyards, animal and crop production. I would like to be able to access lots of essential services online or local by 2040.
I'm Christina from Offerdal in the middle of Sweden. This is my rural area with beautiful surroundings and dedicated people. In 2040, the rural wisdom and perspectives are the foundation for a truly sustainable society. This is my rural.
This is Karme and kids. We are from Estonia, and I want that our children and their children would be able to know that they can have really fun and long-lasting future in this area, in this farm. This is our rural.
Yeah.
So those of you that were attending the high-level opening plenary will have recognised Christina. We didn't let her stand any further or longer out in the snow to give her perspective when we were asking her some more questions, but just a reflection of the different voices. And talking of which, obviously now we want to think about how we manage to get a hold of lots and lots of different voices and different stakeholder perspectives. And so I'll ask Zélie Pépiette from DG Agri, from the European Commission, to join me. And she's going to give us a presentation of some of those stakeholder inputs into the rural vision. Zélie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David. And good afternoon, everyone. Well, we've seen some of the results of the public consultation from Maria, and Maciek has given us the foresight exercise. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So now we're turning to another way that we reached out to citizens and stakeholders, inviting contributions to the development of the long-term rural vision. And that's what we called Welcome to Our Rural. And as we're getting these little testimonials from people out there, I think this is a very good title. So what is Welcome to Our Rural? It's an off-the-shelf participatory workshop package to enable rural communities to contribute directly into the rural vision process. It's available in 21 languages, so as accessible as possible. And it contains the design, script and materials to run a 2-hour workshop. So why did we do this? Oh, I think probably by now you've already got some of the answers. It was intended to complement the online public questionnaire and the foresight exercise. So it's an additional channel by which people can make contributions which really focus on a local territory or a region. So as we saw in the video from President von der Leyen, she said, the future of the EU's rural areas can only be shaped locally. So this was a way for local groups or regional groups to put in their own view of their own region. It was very much a participatory exercise. Obviously, because of COVID, it was done online, but it was still participatory, with allowing any group of people wanting to contribute and to think about the future of their rural area. And one of our intentions was to reach not just beyond the Brussels bubble, but beyond the usual suspects. So to really put something out there to offer to anyone who wanted to contribute. The next slide, please. Thank you. So this shows you a little bit what holding a workshop was like. And in the middle there, you've got a crew of people in the middle of a workshop. It's intended to give a flavour of what happened. So they started off by thinking about the particular rural area and what makes it special for the people who live there. And then in the second phase, it moves on to considering the likely future in 2040. So it's very much thinking in this long-term way, complementing the foresight, thinking what's going to happen, what the key drivers of climate change and demography and the digital advances and changes in globalization and localization, how these are going to affect the local area over 20 years and what that might mean. And so the wheel that you can see in the center is where participants plotted where they thought their area was going to be, not where they wanted it to be, but where they thought it was likely to be, taking account of the global, the mega trends going on. And then in the next phase, it was exploring, well, what do we need to take us from where we think we might be to where we would like to be? So exploring the gap between the expected situation and the desired situation, and thinking about development paths that might help to move along that. So identifying potential opportunities and what would help to make those reality, and identifying gaps and what would need to be done to close those gaps. So the enabling conditions, really. And then also a really specific thing, because stories and narrative are really powerful in helping us to imagine, in helping us to understand, and in helping us to stand in other people's shoes. So we were also collecting inspiring stories from these areas. The next slide, please. So we put it out there as an offer. We had no idea how attractive this would be, who would want to take it up. I must give a big shout out here, actually, to the National Rural Networks and to the ENRD. Of course, they're organizing this whole week, but they were really instrumental in publicizing and encouraging, in coaching, in encouraging people to take this up. And we had really a bigger response than we expected. Workshops took place in 19 member states. And then there was also one sort of EU level workshop, which was the Association of Small Islands. So we got 166 contributions, some of which are really, really local, a group of neighbours coming together. Some are regional, and some were very contributions that came out of very big meetings organised by national rural networks, bringing together their rural stakeholders or rural citizens to look at the whole member state. And I don't know how well you can see on this slide, but where there's a big blue dot, that's a meeting that represents the whole country. So France looks a bit sparse, but it's because there's one big blue dot of a meeting that covered the whole of France, whereas Spain has got lots of red dots because there were lots of different meetings. And then in some countries, like, for example, Latvia, the National Rural Network organised one meeting, but they had regional subgroups within that meeting. So there was a big variety because this was put out there for people to use as they wanted. But overall, more than 2,900 people took part. Now, we don't actually know how many people took part in some workshops, so I strongly suspect that it's actually over 3,000, but we only actually know that it's more than 2,900. And I think I'd just like to say on behalf of all of us involved that we're really, really grateful to everyone who took part. We hope that some people are watching today. We're really grateful to the National Rural Networks for supporting this, to the individual organisers, and to all the people who took part, because hearing these voices, getting these messages is really crucial to making the rural vision something that's relevant and something that matters and something that will be effective. So doing it, all together rather than from Brussels for rural areas. The next slide, please. So now we come to, we've looked at what it was. Now, what have you told us? We had a huge diversity of inputs and responses. And today, I'm only going to give a very quick glimpse and a flavour of the contributions, just to give you an idea of what we've received. And then we're analysing this to take out messages which feed into the rural vision. So I'm focusing on some examples of individual contributions to illustrate the diversity and the richness. So this first one is a word cloud from the EU Association of Small Islands. You saw some word clouds earlier, which also were drawn from some of the other word clouds from different groups, different workshops on the theme of what does your area mean to you? And here you can see the recurrent concepts of community, identity, belonging, culture, nature, freedom and fresh air. So these things coming back of what their rural areas mean. The next slide, please. So moving on to a next level from one individual group, which was the word cloud. What you can see here is a composite of the 9 contributions that we received from workshops held in Germany. So this is illustrating where they expect to be, where they think they'll likely be in 2040. And the wheel, again, I'm not sure how visible that is, but the presentation will be available later. The wheel is arranged in 8 categories. So infrastructure and services, social inclusion and vitality, income, work and jobs, basic goods, food and energy, digital technological advances. Climate change has 2 slices of pie because there's the impact of the territory on climate change and the impact of climate change on the community. And then 1 for environment. And several of these categories include several things. For example, infrastructure and services includes transport, education, health, housing. So groups might have put more than 1 dot there because they might have a different view of the situation of different services. And the center is a poor situation and the circumference is a good situation. So groups then considered these issues and plotted where they thought they would be. Excuse me. And to give you a feel, here you just see a diagram, but we got a lot of information in with this. And there was clearly a lot of potential there. People felt there was a lot of potential to develop, but sometimes there were obstacles preventing that from happening. You can see there's a bit of a skewed distribution here. So the bottom right corner, this is digitalization, and there's more optimism of where they think they'll be in terms of access to good digital infrastructure. And the next one up on the right, that's access to the basic goods of food and energy. There's more optimism there than on the bottom quadrant on the left, which is about climate, where there was generally much more concern about how they would be affected by climate change and whether there would be adequate measures in place to mitigate climate change. Much more variable situation for infrastructure services and social inclusion. There were very big concerns about housing, the availability of affordable housing and quality housing, and also health and transport came up a lot. And one other thing I'd like to point out here is you'll have noticed that there's 1 set of dots that are light green, and I've done that just to show you that's one particular group. And that's a group, an example from a mountain area. You can see that their view is rather different to the other groups. So perhaps because they're a mountain area, they were much more pessimistic in terms of the situation of housing and in terms of whether they would have adequate digital infrastructure. They were more positive about social cohesion, about the vitality of the community, and also about the quality of their environment. And also, they were really quite negative about climate change. They're very, very concerned, already feeling the impact of climate change. So we can get a lot of different things from seeing how this. We can see where there's a lot of consolidation and common ground. And we can also see where particular types of rural territory have a different view. Next slide, please. So having considered what the likely situation was, they then moved on to the enabling conditions and what's essential to unlock the potential and to close gaps, so to move towards the circumference of the circle. There was a lot of emphasis, and I think, again, you're starting to hear messages coming again and again. Integrated and networked approaches, governance, planning, and participation. There was a real recognition that good digital infrastructure is absolutely essential in order to be able to deliver other benefits. And there was a lot of emphasis on the existence of good social capacity. People were willing to volunteer. There was already a lot of community spirit. But in order to thrive and to flourish, particularly in areas where the population is declining, then that needs more recognition and support in order to thrive. There were good examples of win-win opportunities where initiatives can have both all three of economic, social, and environmental benefits. For example, climate-friendly renovation of existing buildings, maybe buildings that are unused or where their use is no longer there. and using that either for housing or as social hubs to support, for example, social activities and volunteering capacity. So you get an economic benefit, a social benefit, and an environmental benefit. The same with renewable energy, which was recognized as a huge opportunity and can deliver jobs, climate benefits, and also community benefits. Short supply chains and local farm shops. And there were some great examples there of local farmers collaborating together and reaching out to the community, reducing food miles, giving quality food, traceability, and this then serving as a hub for the community. But there were problems and obstacles recognized as well. And a particular one in relation to local processing and renewable energy was that often red tape and bureaucracy or the governance arrangements can limit that. And something else that was recognized as an obstacle was the need for better recognition and valuing and financial reward for the provision of ecosystem services. It was recognized as a huge potential, something that's needed by the whole of society, but it's difficult at the moment because it's inadequately rewarded. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is another aspect of the contributions. As I said, we received a whole range of contributions, and groups decided to present material how they wanted. This comes from Austria. Some groups crystallized their vision into a graphic or a text. And here we see a vision of a confident region living and working sustainably in harmony with nature, with a reduced ecological footprint, development of the circular economy and regional supply chains, and above all, a joyful community, appreciating and respecting each other, celebrating together. So this is a vision that can come about through making decisions for themselves within a connected planning process. And this was what they produced as the final output of their workshop. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to close, I've given you a few very quick glimpses of the amazing material that we've received. And we're really grateful for all of this. We're processing it and we're feeding it into the long-term rural vision process. I think you'll have heard that there are already some common themes emerging from the different strands and sources from the public consultation and the foresight and what I've presented now. And now I'm going to hand over to Paul Soto from the ENRD contact point, because he's going to give a brief overview of the overall messages that have been identified so far from the range of stakeholder inputs that the ENRD has been working with. So thank you very much. And I hope that flavour has given you a taste of the material that we've got.
Thank you very much, Sally. And yes, indeed, we'll hand straight across to Paul. We can bring Paul in just now, my colleague from the ENRD contact point. And Paul's going to bring in a lot more of the aspect of those rural voices. Paul.
Yes, thank you, David, and thank you, Zeli. Zeli has told you about the method of carrying out these workshops and also the amazing responses. I want to do two things, in fact. I want to summarize some of the key messages coming out of these grassroots workshops and the rural voices based on some work carried out by Bill Slee, Professor Bill Slee, who's been doing an amazing job summarizing some of these very rich and very diverse opinions. So that is really looking at things coming from the bottom, from the local to the EU level. But then secondly, what I want to do is to look at things in the other direction and to look at things from the EU level down to the local by considering a series of points that were discussed in the European Network thematic group about the wider policy framework. And I think what we'll see is that, in fact, the two are pulling in the same direction. And they also reinforce many of the things that came out of the online questionnaire and the online consultation that Maria talked about, and were illustrated by many of the points that Zeli said. And I think they also pick up many of the points in the commissioners said in the first session. So I would venture the idea that, in fact, what needs to be done is becoming clearer and clearer. And in fact, I think it's actually quite clear. It's how to do it that we really need to work on. So let's sort of think about this over the next days. So next slide, please. And so I'm going to start off with the local side, summarising some of the key points that came out of these the Rural Voices workshops. Next slide, please. So first of all, a couple of general points about the responses. I'd like to pick up on what Magic said about the fact that the coronavirus pandemic has made us, allowed us to see that things could really change. And I think that's true. Things may change more than we originally thought. But at the same time, we're in an incredibly tumultuous situation where we don't know whether we're going to, many people don't know whether they're going to be able to work, whether they're going to be able to go out, whether they're going to be able to go on holiday, from one week to another. So it is not surprising, really, in this context, that many of the statements and the concerns are actually based in the here and now, and they are actually more in the short term and the medium term than really the very long term. And that has also a corollary to it, which is, I think, that there is a very strong expectation that yes, there is potential, and there is this possible future, but really to unlock this potential, the steps have to happen now. We have to start taking the action. There has to be a clear pathway from the very uncertain situation we are now to this future in 2040. And I think that picks up on what Vice President Suica was saying there in the opening session as well. Second point is about the diversity. And this is what makes it incredibly difficult to summarize all the comments that are coming out. The diversity, people's different positions in rural Europe, in this very different rural Europe, shapes their vision. And we had people from mountains, we had people from islands, we had people from the north, the south, the east, the west, the dry interior of many countries. And we also had people from more affluent rural areas and areas that were at least not declining, and some of them actually growing. What we find in that is that one of the key factors, and this relates again to the foresight analysis, demography does come out as a critical factor. Billsley called it it's a barometer of opportunities and people's expectations. So what we find is that in the areas which are hemorrhaging people and losing people at a huge rate, losing their young people, the plea is we have to have the viable infrastructure and the services and the jobs to be able to survive. It's more about catching up with the cities than other things, but it's this basic level. There's also in those areas more concern tends to be more concern. It's not always the case, but there's more concern about the negative impacts of climate change. So the droughts and the floods and all the rest of it, than the potential that the rural have in a green transition. That's not always the case, but it's often the case. Areas that are already starting to attract young people, and there are many who are attracting young people, retirees, people moving from the city, many different types of people, tend to have a more optimistic view of the future. And this is where this more post-industrial, if you like, vision comes out, a vision of a sustainable, collaborative, creative, rural, and the idea of the rural as being a bit the source of well-being for the whole of society. I think the key thing is that both the growing and declining areas have opportunities and problems. So the growing areas also have major problems, and the declining areas have opportunities. And the challenge for the vision is going to be to get these very, very different situations into the vision, into a vision, an EU vision. Okay, next slide, please. So, despite the differences, there are a series of common strands, and many of them have already been mentioned by Maria, by Zeli, by the speakers in the first session, and so on. So some of this I'm going to repeat, and it's just reinforcing what has already been said. The first one is that, yes, everybody realizes there is a potential, but in order to realize that potential, there has to be this base level of access to appropriate services. And those services include clearly the digital, both the skills and the infrastructure. They are also, as several people have said, the physical mobility and new forms of mobility are central. But there are also things like the central role that schools play in rural communities, the big issues around housing. And again, I quote Bill Sleeve, as been writing this up. He talked about it that we need to sort of reinvent a base level of the rural welfare state. We really need to start defining what this acceptable level of access to services is. And that is something that is easy to say, and many people have said it already, and it's much harder to do. What is the level? And not only defining the level, but it means getting into fields of activity where many different public authorities have competences at different levels, and private bodies are also involved. It's technically complex if we're talking about energy or digitalization. And this is way beyond the normal field for rural development. Okay, so and many people, as a result of that, were calling for a much more joined up policy framework at the EU and national level, and then much more coordinated planning at the local level. So it's this combination of the framework and the planning. Second point, again, to realize the potential, one thing is the physical, the services and the infrastructure, and then it's the people. For people to be actually actors, not just bystanders, not just users of technology and the changes that are happening, but for the rural to really be able to take the initiative and define things in ways that are interesting for the relevant for the rural. There needs to be a change in the and far more support for the capacity to innovate in rural areas. And there are a whole lot of there's a melting pot of ideas that are taking place around different kinds of hubs, fab labs, third tiers-lieu. In the French have different collaborative spaces, brokers, different kinds of mixed partnerships, public-private partnerships, different models of managing public services and managing businesses. So these crossovers, these mixtures, these are the things that need to be encouraged. Third point is the many of the comments coming from the groups stress the new emphasis on regional and local production, the opportunities for relocalizing production in different ways. So food is the obvious one. Short food supply chains coming back with a big push. The wider bioeconomy, energy, new forms of work. These are all big opportunities that are seen to be the levers that we should be mobilizing. Fourth point, the environment. I think there's a general recognition that the environment is maybe the key, together with this sort of sense of belonging, the central asset that rural areas have, the environment in its broadest sense, and that this asset is deteriorating very quickly, and that there's a recognition that things like the Green Deal are extremely important and offer this green transition offers an opportunity. But that to really work, there's going to have to be fundamental changes in the attitudes and the valuing of these, the recognition and the values given to these assets. So that's another area. And then the fifth point is something that has also come up in the other speakers. Is that there's a general feeling that whatever policies are implemented at EU level or national level, they should be policies which enable. That there should be a shift. There's a general criticism about too much bureaucracy, too much control, and a desire for a general shift from controls to enabling. Again, participatory partnerships, planning, a whole load of it. Again, there's a melting pot of things there. So next slide, please. Next slide. Yep. So just to give you a flavor, people came out of these meetings saying things like this. This is a quote from the Greek National Rural Network. And they say, we wish to continue the discussions about our future and be informed on a permanent basis. So the discussions don't stop here. This worked. It was good. We're glad we were consulted and discussed. But it can't just stop here. It has to go on, and we want to be informed about what happens next. So next slide. So now I'm going to shift. I leave the workshops and I join the thematic group, the NRD thematic group, which discussed 8 points, which you can find in the highlights of this the last meeting we had. Many of you will be here. If I misinterpret some of the points, you come back, I hope, in the discussions. There were 8 points. So the first point was that the vision needs to inspire. And I think some of the quotes and things we have showed how and some of the great young people who are coming in from giving these video presentations and statements that show that a bit. They need to change the narrative. It needs to think big, and it needs to really stress the value of the rural as a sort of precious source of well-being for the whole of society, something that we have to protect and we have to nurture and garden, if you like. But at the same time, it can't just stay at the level of a narrative and a story. It can't just stay there. It has to be translated into smart objectives, into targets and into milestones. these milestones, by the way, many people said should be things that people understand and are meaningful for people and mobilize people, but they have to be operational and practical. So that was two of the points. Those objectives, targets, and milestones, they're not going to be implemented at an EU level. They will be implemented at a national or regional or local level. So they need to be translated into maybe first an EU strategy. And we've heard things about action plans, pacts, agendas, these sorts of things. So maybe that's the EU level, but they then need to be translated into the national level, and that means buy-in. People have to buy into it. People have to believe in it. People have to want to do it. There may be incentives, there may be sticks, there may be different ways of doing it, but you have to have people along with us. There are various tools that are mentioned for doing that. There was a discussion that went on in the thematic group about stock taking. Proofing has come up over and over again, and the tracking of results. That if we on the one hand, you proof what the policies are doing, but at the same time, we need to sort of track and follow what whether the new policies that are put into place actually achieve the results. So those were raised as very important. Next slide, and that's my last one. Yes, so lots of discussion about different mechanisms for policy alignment and coordination mechanisms, which have been tried in many countries, lots of joint committees and planning meetings and things. Very interesting idea discussed, which I think we will hear about a bit more in workshop 8 on Wednesday, about involvement in the rural involvement in the rural semester, in the semester process. Lots of talking about that, but then the general feeling is that yes, these mechanisms are important and proofing is important, but they can just be paper exercises unless there is a strong commitment behind them. So the question of the governance and who does what, and that there is a leadership and a clear leadership, and probably that this leadership needs to be something that is above the different sectoral departments that are responsible for rural policy, comes across as very important. Last 2 points. All this needs a lot of data, intelligence, and capturing the differences. So there are lots of very interesting discussions about think tanks, about some sort of rural observatory that might be involved at that at EU level, and that at local level, different types of science society platforms, knowledge hubs, and various other mechanisms there. And finally, again, it comes back to where I was at the end of the points coming out of the local discussions, that all this has to go to enabling and empowering local action. And there are lots of, again, ideas and mechanisms for doing that. So to finish, I think if we were able to make some real progress on those points, those macro points, those more strategic points, I think we would be closer to be able to meet the expectations and the demands that are coming out of the local workshops. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I've got one question that comes up from listening to both presentations, which is to you both. I'll start with Zeli and then I'll come back to Paul, which is throughout the process of using the long-term vision for rural areas package, the workshops, the responses, were there any activities or responses which particularly struck or inspired you? Zeli, I can ask you.
There are lots like that, and I don't want to pick out any one, because that would sort of make it stand out more above the rest. But I think as a general impression, sort of going through all these 166 contributions and looking at them with the diversity and the different situations, but in each case, it really felt as if the group was really wanting to share, to communicate something about their situation, what it was to live in their rural area, and what their concerns and their hopes and the opportunities were. It really felt like being invited into their situation. So it really did feel as if people were saying, welcome to our rural, and wanting us to hear and to understand and to share.
Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, and I can reflect on that. I took part in 2 of the workshops and got that same feeling of yeah, this is about our scenario. We do want to share it. If I can come then to Paul, and the same question to you. What about the whole process? Did you take inspiration from?
I would like to mention I think the fantastic role of the National Rural Networks. They were, this was sprung on everybody quite suddenly. Only had about a month to do everything. In the middle of a pandemic, lots of other things, urgent action on, and most of the events would not have happened if there hadn't been this web of networks at the National Rural Network level. You know, the presence on the territory, and they spread the information to people, so they inform people first of all. Many then trained or informed the facilitators who then managed the workshops. Many people, many of the NRNs adapted the method, the basic method, to their own circumstances. So we had some very, very imaginative methods being used. So Finland, just to mention some, Finland used a video game, Minecraft, to involve young people in actually using the video game to design their future. The groups had focus groups looking at the different types of areas, so the islands, the tourist areas, the mountains, and so on. So you can start to see the differences. And Poland had different focus groups as well, but also brought in an expert opinion into the whole thing. So there was that blend of local and expert. And Spain used their antennae. So I could mention all of them, but we haven't got time. So the important thing for me is to be that I was going to say face to face, but actually it wasn't face to face because it was computer to computer. But it was that sort of personal interaction between people. Okay.
Okay, and I'm just going to bring up one question that's come up through the chat, and it's saying about, enabling that bottom-up process that's been so clear, it's been mentioned by everyone in their presentations, about how do we enable more of this kind of local decision-making, local enablement, rather than perhaps top-down decision-making. So that's just a question that's coming through from the chat, so I thought it was worth giving it an airing. Zeli, any immediate response?
I think there are some interesting examples around the EU of things like, there's rural parliaments, there's some citizens' assemblies, there's examples in France, for example, in Ireland, and this is something that can be done at all levels. There are examples of where municipal councils are starting to include participatory processes in their decision making. I think actually in some ways this is something that perhaps COVID has enabled, and coming back about a bit to Maciek's point about COVID in some ways has enabled people to imagine the unimaginable or to start doing things in different ways. Because everything has moved online, this means that meetings that previously might have taken place in an enclosed council chamber can now be opened up. There's things like participatory budgets where citizens are invited to put in projects for a certain amount of the budget, and then there's local voting. I live in a commune, not a rural commune, but a commune where that's something that's coming in. So I think there are a number of initiatives, but they're a bit scattered, and we need really to think about that and to make sure that this knowledge is out there, and the capacity building. I think that was one of the things that I would take, messages that I would take, is there's a lot of potential and a lot of interest, but there's need for capacity building for some of these more socially innovative models to grow and spread.
Thanks very much for that reflection, Zelly. Paul, something a little bit more concrete, because what we've done is we've really managed to set the scene and really give a full flavour of all the consultation process, and people just beginning to get involved and give us questions in the chat. We're going to be moving throughout the next few days into workshops, and they're getting into a lot more detail. We had one question in the chat about what about farming? What about the ecological transition? That's really something we can address through the workshops, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think it's really important that that everybody who's listening is aware that this is not a listening event. This is a participating event. So we have organised it around certain thematic areas. So you have these 8 participative workshops, but each of the workshops will be trying to answer 2 questions. So what are the key things that should go into the vision, and how do we get there? So very much what we've been talking about, and maybe the how do we get there is the most, but I mean, I think these 2 questions are absolutely central. And we will be collecting your thoughts from each of these workshops and pulling those together and then feeding them into the final plenary and presenting them to everybody and to the commissioners. So these are ideas that we hope will go into will be taken into account, will go in some form into the communication. And so please do come to the workshops thinking about bringing your ideas, because that's what we rely on. The workshop is about that. It's about your ideas, not what we're saying, really.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Zelly and Paul. Absolutely right. Great that we've got the grounds for what's going to be a really fascinating conversation, or a number of conversations. I'll come back just in a moment to how you can continue to get involved throughout the week, but I want to give my thanks to Maria Gaffo, to Maciek, to Zelly, and to Paul for really setting the scene about where we've got to, and here you can see them all. Thank you very much to all of you for your inputs, lots to reflect upon. And of course, now what do? We go back to the ground and to the stakeholders. So we've been giving you inspirational messages all the way through. Let's have a look at one more video compilation for today of some of those messages from rural stakeholders.
Cześć, mam na imię Magdalena. Mieszkam na obszarze wiejskim w południowej Polsce u podnóża Babiej Góry. Pracuję w organizacji pozarządowej lokalnej grupie działania pod Babiogórze. W 2040 roku widzę siebie w zielonej przestrzeni, gdzie powietrze będzie czyste, a ludzie będą przeciwdziałać zmianom klimatu poprzez zastosowanie między innymi odnawialnych źródeł energii. To jest mój obszar wiejski.
Hi, I'm Jonathan from Offaly in Ireland. This is my rural area with epic landscapes and natural beauty. In 2040, I hope rural Europe will be world leaders in sustainable and eco-tourism. This is my rural.
In 2040, I hope that rural Europe will help communities not to lose essential services in order to hold up population in and support their business ideas. This is my rural.
Ahojte, moje meno je Andrea, pochádzam zo Slovenska a toto je náš vidiek plný krásnej prírody a potenciálneho v pôdohospodárstve. Do roku 2040 ľudia vyrastajúci v mestských oblastiach pochopia, ako veľmi vidiek potrebujú, aký je užitočný a úžasný.
So there you have it, some more reflections from rural areas. So Paul was just pointing out, get involved. From here on in, it's really over to you. Marshak made the wonderful point, Zelly referred to it again, that we have an opportunity to reimagine the future of our rural areas. And this week will be about that future, our rural areas, how we reimagine it, how we get involved. So the next few days, there's going to be a series of 8 workshops, which are all looking into details of what we could discuss about our rural. So if you've signed up for them, if you've had the approval to attend those workshops, please get involved, please give your contribution, make your voice heard, because you are in the position where you do get to shape that, inform that discussion. We've also got the marketplace where you can get more ideas and have an exchange with the various stakeholders and organizations running those particular components and sites. We've got fringe events on Thursday. And I've got to say, from a personal perspective, please make sure you vote by Wednesday night for your favorite project, because we've got 20 really inspiring projects, finalists in the Rural Inspiration Awards. They deserve your vote. So get involved. We'll post the link through the chat so that you can make your vote known. And on Friday, we'll come back together. We'll bring it all back. We'll take everything from all these conversations, all the results that we've been talking about today, and have one big conversation. And that's where we can really shape what our rural future will look like for EU's rural areas. One last thing, please don't forget that we gave you a Mentimeter link earlier. That's www.menti.com. And the code, if you'll give me 1 second, is 70 40 27 49. And I'm sure we'll repost that in the chat soon. You've come to us today, those of you that are not streaming online, but are coming through the Zoom link that's provided by the Rural Vision Week portal. So at rural-vision-week.eu, that's your navigation to get to all the different components. So please make sure you make yourself familiar with it, see about all its functionality. This is a week-long conversation like no other. I hope you'll get involved. I hope you'll stay connected. Please come back to us. And just to play us out, for final inspiration, perhaps some of those words that we saw at the beginning of those word clouds that will guide you to more inspiration. That concludes today's conversation. We'll see you all online again tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week. I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you.